When we think of the world's biggest brands in mountain biking, there are a few that rival Trek. And when you think of the most popular bike that Trek has ever made in the mountain bike category, this is it, the Fuel EX. New fresh for 2023, this bike is now in its 6th generation. It's been completely redesigned from the ground up, and we were particularly eager to get our hands on this thing after we tested its e-bike version, the Fuel EXE. A very similar silhouette to this bike, but obviously this bike is the analog acoustic. Lots of carryover bits, but the interesting thing about this bike is it's essentially made for everyone. Now, we'll get more onto that in a second, but Scotty, kick us off here, mate. You've been riding this bike for the last couple of months. Give us a bit of an overview about the 2023 Fuel EXE has in its package.
Yeah, well, as you've just touched on, you know, it was when we first got this thing, I was pretty curious as to how they were going to improve on a pretty tried and tested platform. I mean, there must have been some nervous people at, you know, Trek HQ when they were releasing this thing because, you know, for such a popular model in their range of bikes, you know, for them to, you know, to make such, you know, a lot of subtle changes and yet improve on an already proven platform, then that's exactly what they've done, because I mean, this is pretty versatile for what it is, to say the least.
Mate, run us through the numbers. How much travel are we talking and wheel size? And interesting on the wheel size, because there's quite a fair bit going on there, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, the previous Fuel, this is the Fuel EX, so the previous Fuel was a 130, 140 mil. They've pumped up each end by 10 mil, so this is 140 in the rear and 150 mil stock out of the box. But as you just said, this also has an option to run this bike as a mullet.
Nice, so 27.5 in the rear end.
Yep.
Now, size, sizing, that's an interesting one. Getting back to just how versatile this bike is. Trek have made this bike to cater for the entire masses. There isn't a female version or a male version. There's frame sizing from extra small all the way through to XL.
Yep.
They've also gone and done a full alloy bike, a full alloy frame set, and then we've got this lush carbon here. Now, there's a bunch of different alloy spec levels and a bunch of different carbon spec levels. This one right here is at the very, very top, but those alloy complete bikes in Australia starting right on 5,000 bucks, and the carbon completes at 7,000. So exceptional value for money when you look at the part spec on these things. Now, we won't get too bogged down the part spec. Like I mentioned, this thing's pretty off the charts, but the thing that's interesting, all the carbon bikes share the same frame. Now, Scotty, if you got this bike in say size large, like I would ride, or size XL like you would, it would come with 2.9 front and rear.
Correct.
If I wanted to go and change that to a mullet, do I have to buy new dropouts, or what's the story with that?
No, mate. So in the rear end, it's got like their little flip chip in the rear swing arm as well. So you can run it in the high setting and just drop the 29-inch wheel out and then drop a 27.5-inch wheel, simple as that. But the other thing with this bike as well is the adjustable headset cups as well. So you can actually adjust your reach a little bit, your head angle, and also obviously adjust the bottom bracket height and whatnot as well. You can do that in the 29-inch setting, but you can also do it if you put a 27.5-inch wheel on the back as well. So there's a lot of adjustability with this bike.
And that comes stock as well, that's not an aftermarket piece?
Comes stock.
Wow, Trek really done a lot there for that customization. That's kind of the big on-trend thing that we're seeing sort of in the last couple of years, is that people want to buy the bike and adjust it. Now, you mentioned before, Scotty, just before we started talking about this, like perfect bike for riding on your kind of local XC laps, if you want to jump on the plane or the boat and go down to Derby, or a threadbow trip, something like this. Now, tell us some of the ways you can kind of adapt the bike to suit where you're going to ride.
Yeah, look, again, with the stock adjustability, I mean, there's a plethora of things you can do to sort of manipulate the angles on this bike to get it to suit, you know, where you ride and your own riding style and whatnot stock. But the other cool features with this bike is due to the frame construction as well. The bike is capable to take a coil shock, so you can, without voiding the warranty, and you can also run a larger fork, and it'll take up to a 160 mil fork as well. So if you wanted to pump your stock fork out to 160, or you actually, for example, you just wanted to maintain one bike, you wanted, you know, your everyday trail bike for your local trails, but you know, you wanted to ride the same bike and you wanted to go to Derby, or you wanted to go do some bike parks, you could almost invest in a couple of extra parts, like a, you know, a Fox 38 or a Zeb fork and a coil, and swap out those parts, a little bit more travel, a little bit burlier, and then go and ride that, and then come home and swap those parts out, and actually just, so you could almost invest in a few little extras and have a bike that's really jack of all trades that you can take anywhere.
I think we're going to see a lot more of that. People sort of maybe culling their bike collection down from having 3, 4 kind of niche bikes down to really just one kind of mountain bike that does it all. And I guess Trek have really kind of gone and brought this to market just at the right time, keeping that in mind. Now, one of the things when we've been out riding this thing, you never have to reach down and lock out the rear end to make it efficient. It pedals really well. Tell us a bit about suspension linkage that Trek use. They're the only brand obviously to run this linkage, and is it efficient, and does it kind of lock out the rear wheel? How's it work?
Yeah, well, I mean, like that does also, come a little bit down to bike setups as well. And obviously a larger travel bike, you're going to notice this a little bit more. But for this thing here, like one thing I found, and I've ridden one of the previous Fuels as well, is the rear end is a lot stiffer as well. So you're getting a lot more of a compliant bike. You're getting a lot more predictable feel in the rear end. This thing is actually very, very supple off the top as well. So over that light trail chatter, for what this bike is, it really does hug the ground really well, and it creates a lot more mid-stroke support as well. So even over the heavier lines, you're getting sort of the best of both worlds. You're getting that nice, compliant, nimble sort of bike that really does provide a lot of traction to your rear wheel. But you're also getting a bike that does handle the heavier terrain for a short or a mid-travel bike as well. So it really is versatile in that area as well.
Mate, so we've sort of touched on, obviously it's efficient. You can ride a bunch of trail for hours and hours. But it also doesn't shy away from the techie bits. But tell me, is it a fun bike? Because I think when you talk to the average rider that wants to go out, they want to be obviously get a good workout, but they want to have some fun. They want to be able to rip some corners, hit a few jumps. How's this thing going, kind of all that category? Well,
mate, that's exactly what it's for, and Trek haven't missed the mark. So I've been out for some like big missions on this thing, like 50, 60K hot laps on this thing, and pedals unreal. Like it's, pedals akin to an XC bike, but obviously with all those aggressive angles, steeper seat tube, slacker head tube and whatnot as well. So it's no XC bike, of course. It's definitely a trail bike, but I wouldn't even really sort of put it in the realms of feeling like a trail bike when you hit those descents. It almost feels in between a trail bike and an enduro bike. So I'd call it more on the, aggressive trail bike sort of feel when you hit those descents. But climbing wise and, maintaining momentum through that undulating terrain, this thing pedals unreal.
Wicked. Is there anything like throughout the test, obviously you've ridden it like we were saying for a fair while. What are some of the downsides? Is there anything where this thing runs out of talent? Is there anything you kind of didn't like about it? Is it noisy? Has it got a rattle? Has it got a bit that maybe that feels a bit unfinished, or does it just feel like a pretty well-oiled machine?
Look, it feels like a Trek, like it's funny how like we get to ride a lot of different brands of bike, and you do get used to sort of different brands of bikes, familiar characteristics. So when I first jumped on this thing, I was like, oh yeah, it's a Trek, feels like a Trek. It's got all,
it's got that planted feel.
It's got a nice planted feel. But this thing, I think they've upped the ante with attention to detail, with that little glove box they've got there as well. Especially with the new rear swing arm, the burlier sort of, front triangle on the bike as well. Like you actually look at this bike and it's like, wow, that's a lot burlier than its predecessor. And when I first got it, looked at it, it's like, oh, okay, and they've upped the travel and whatnot as well. This thing is going to be a little bit more of a slug to pedal, but it couldn't have been more mistaken. So it still has maintained that Trek fuel characteristic from yesteryear. However, the new Fuel EX is definitely a game changer in this popular model. So anyone who's a fan of the Fuel is going to be a super big fan of the Fuel EX, put it that way.
Mate, I think Scotty's just wrapped it up and said it all right there. Guys, the Fuel EX is in store right now, right across Australia. Tons of different models like we were saying. Check him out, jump online, check him out. But yeah, this is a bike that's definitely going to see a lot of out there on the trails.